When Lucy Letby was convicted back in 2023, I was sure she was a baby killer. I now believe that she's an innocent woman. My name's Oliver Harvey. I'm chief feature writer for the Sun newspaper, and I've worked in Fleet Street for nearly 30 years. The Lucy Letby case was one of the most infamous in British legal history. Letby, a nurse charged with looking after young babies, was accused of actually murdering them. It shocked Britain, and when she was actually convicted in August 2023, many across the country welcomed the fact that she received an all-life tariff. Letby would die behind bars. Recently, I was asked to look into the so-called Letby truther phenomenon. That is, people on the internet, medical people, journalists, surmising that actually Letby was innocent. I didn't believe that. And then I went away, locked myself away, and studied the evidence. And after a week of late nights, a lot of coffee, seeking advice from people in the medical and statistical world, I now believe that she's an innocent woman. So what makes me think that? I've been a journalist now in Fleet Street for 30 years, and in the earlier parts of my career worked for a news agency in the Old Bailey and the High Court, and witnessed one of the most infamous miscarriages of justice that British justice has ever seen. They included Angela Canning, who was accused of killing 2 of her children, when in fact they were cot deaths. Now, medical evidence was put before the jury, examined by prosecutors, examined by police, and a guilty verdict was established. In fact, she was a completely innocent woman. I interviewed her husband Terry, a lovely salt-of-the-earth guy, and saw the absolute devastation and misery the family was put through. So I do realise that British justice is admired across the world, but it isn't infallible. Mistakes do happen. So pouring through the Letby evidence, the first thing that struck me, and was indeed the first thing placed before the jury at her original trial, was a statistical analysis of the shifts she was working at the Countess of Chester Hospital, and when suspicious deaths or collapses of premature babies took place. Now, it appeared damning. There was a cross by every one of those 25 incidents where Letby had been the only nurse on shift. It seemed, we don't know, but how much that swayed the jury, but as I say, it seemed pretty damning piece of evidence. Actually, if you talk to many statisticians, they'll tell you that the statistical evidence was actually completely flawed. Why? Because the time period used on those suspicious incidents was too narrow. There were other deaths and other incidents when children there were other deaths and other incidents when babies were collapsing that didn't feature in this statistical chart. Now, this is a phenomenon known as the Texas sharpshooter fallacy. It's an easy way of explaining it. So Texas sharpshooter, they have a cluster of bullets. It looks like they're all really close together. But there's one up there and one down there that isn't drawn to the eye, that people don't take into account. And this is what happened with the Letby statistics. So other incidents that weren't taken into account in that chart. And to me, that central plank of evidence shifts the whole case against Letby. If this was the prosecutor's most salient and first point they put before a jury, then the whole case wobbles. Then, of course, there's the medical evidence. Now, the evidence put before the jury was that Letby injected into the bloodstream or the feeding tubes of the babies insulin or air, which would have killed them. So a string of neonatologists have come out and called this theory on how the babies were killed implausible and ridiculous. Expert prosecution witness Dr. Dowie Evans said that air bubbles injected into babies caused discoloration of their skin. Now, he took this from a medical paper by a Canadian doctor who has subsequently come out and discredited that theory. So I don't think the medical evidence is there to convict Letby beyond reasonable doubt, which a criminal court in Britain requires. So remember, Lucy Letby, who's been called an angel of death, has protested her innocence throughout the whole judicial process. Police couldn't find any motive for these killings, and no internet searches into what was a pretty technical medical process for a method that she was accused of killing these children. So that's now gone to another piece of evidence which is said to have damned Letby, was that she basically wrote in her notes and said, I did this. She said, I'm evil, I did this. Surely that's the ramblings of a guilty woman. Well, actually, during the period that she wrote it, she had been under suspicion at the hospital, and counsellors had advised that she write her feelings on notepads to help her process what was happening to her. Now, she was one of the senior nurses in that maternity unit, and with this cluster of deaths, perhaps she felt guilty. She felt that some of these tragedies were down to her and the team. Perhaps she thought, you know, the hospital had failed those children, and she felt part of that and felt the need to write this in these letters. Again, what this certainly isn't is a piece of evidence enough to convict someone of murdering 7 babies beyond reasonable doubt. Police also discovered medical handover notes from the hospital in Letby's house. This was again part of the prosecution's evidence. Why would she do this? Well, perhaps she's a conscientious nurse. Perhaps she took her work home with her. We don't know. But what we do know is that again is not a plank of evidence which would be enough to convict someone of being a baby killer. Now, the Countess of Chester Hospital treated babies who were premature and clinging to life. They were in an incredibly fragile state. And the hospital had staff shortages, it was plagued by a superbug, and the leading neonatal expert has described the unit as being out of its depth. Were those babies really murdered? Or could it simply have been negligence? My view is that with so many clustered baby deaths, a scapegoat was subconsciously looked for. Letby, a relatively junior female member of staff, was a convenient scapegoat, I'm afraid. That is my view. And I know this would be very upsetting for the parents of those bereaved children, who we should remember at all times. But if an innocent woman has been convicted, then British justice needs to right that wrong. Justice may be blind in this country, but it's not infallible.